Hi everyone, welcome to this revision video about what site evidence reveals about Helmsley Castle. This is a really important video, this one, because site evidence is absolutely crucial. It dictates everything with history around us, so you really need to know the site evidence so well and be able to use that to answer really interesting and good questions about the history of Helmsley Castle. So let's find out more about site evidence and how to use it. Okay, so we're going to hone in on different parts of the castle and what both site and source evidence can reveal about the history of Helmsley Castle. We can use the physical remains to ask inquiry questions about the past. Physical remains can also inform the artistic interpretations. Using site evidence is absolutely essential in your exam. Use phrases like the physical evidence the site reveals. From the site evidence I can infer that. The word reveals is a really good one, and you can see here particularly criteria C, being aware of how and why the site has changed through time physically, and also what the site reveals about everyday life, attitudes and values, how the physical remains may prompt questions about the past, how the physical remains can inform artistic interpretations, and also the physical remains help you to understand the challenges and benefits of studying the historic environment as well. Now, one of the things I'm going to suggest to you is that you think about the site evidence in terms of the big five. So there's 5 places that really help you to understand the history of Helmsley Castle, the most crucial parts of the site. They are the East Tower, the South Barbican, the Great Hall, the Chapel, and the West Tower in the Tudor Mansion. Other important parts of the castle as well, and just to be aware of where they are, is the South Gate, the Well, the North Barbican, the Brewhouse and the Bakehouse, and the kitchen and service area. And that map just shows you where all of those different places are located on the castle site today. Okay, so we think about the physical site evidence, the big 5. So we've got the East Tower. We know it was slighted in the 14th century. It was heightened in the English Civil War. It was slighted, rubble in the ditch. So this is great for revealing the change in purpose and the turning point, the military, domestic to military, military to romantic ruin. The chapel. So the chapel, green tiles, the moulded jamb, it faces east, it joins the East Tower at an awkward angle. It shows that religion is important, but also falls into disrepair and disuse post-Reformation and the English Civil War. So it shows about changing values and ideas on religion. The South Barbican, 13th century, originally open-backed, defensive military purpose. 14th century, new rooms that were built, new accommodation, the accommodation for the constables, the fireplace, a latrine, storage areas there, the wing walls were added. This tells us about the change from military to domestic. The Great Hall, 14th century, near the kitchen, the pantry and the buttery. It tells us about diversity with the high end and the low end of the Great Hall and the Screen's Passage. It tells us about lives of luxury against lives of servitude. And then the West Tower, the accommodation, a private accommodation for the de Roos family, heightened in the 14th century as well, remodelled, Tudor mansion, the evidence of the windows, the fireplaces, the secret staircase for servants, the Tudor mansion, Edward Manors, the oriel windows. It tells us about the lives of luxury of the lords of Helmsley. So that's, in a nutshell, the big 5 for physical site evidence. Okay, so we're going to look at these bits of site evidence now. What does the East Tower reveal about Helmsley Castle? Well, the East Tower was built by Robert de Roos II around about 1200. That's Robert Furzan de Roos. It had more of an administrative and judicial function. It overlooked the town, and the height was there to show off power. The steward would have been based here. He's the person that kind of runs the castle. Now, it was raised in the 14th century to create more stately rooms. Ear turrets were put on the top, similar to the royal buildings like the Beauchamp Tower, and it was built to impress visitors like King Edward III, who visited in 1334. A fire damaged the tower in the late 14th century, and it was slighted after the siege of Helmsley Castle by Thomas Fairfax. It then became a romantic ruin, the subject of paintings by people like J.M.W. Turner, for example, and it's still a symbol of the castle in the modern era and is the most recognisable tourist feature. So some key features we can see today on the castle. We can see the crenellations, tells us about defence. The ear turrets is about showing off power, because it's sort of trying to be similar to the Tower of London in London. The change in colour shows where it was heightened from original limestone to the sandstone. There's the small holes in the wall, the putlog holes, where the scaffolding would have been when it was built. The arrow loop windows show again defence, and the general height of the tower reveals its purpose is to project power. Okay, so other things that we can see on the other side of the East Tower, the ear turrets. We can also see the original roofline of the early 13th century East Tower from Robert the Roost II, so we can get an impression what the tower originally looked like. The window height gives the sense of the different floors of the castle. The circular base at the bottom is the pillars that held up the floor. And then the missing wall reveals the story of the slighting of the castle. You can still, though, get a sense of the height and grandeur of the East Tower. Now, near to the East Tower is some rubble in the ditch, which again reveals the slighting of the castle, and that combined with the evidence of the unexploded mortar bomb in the museum helps us to recreate the story of the English Civil War. Okay, what about the South Barbican? Well, the South Barbican was built in the 13th century. The gatehouse passage had a portcullis. Arrow loops remain. It was originally open backed with a hoard on the top. The South Barbican was enclosed in the 14th century and accommodation created for the constable of the castle. In the 1570s, the exterior of the gatehouse and the entrance passage were rebuilt. Carved masonry of passage in the passage from stone reused from Riva Abbey. There is also the carving of an imp to ward off evil spirits, and graffiti from the 17th century can also be seen. It was retained, the South Barbican, after 1644, so it was not demolished after the siege of Helmsley Castle. So on the top, we can see the original medieval hoard, and there's holes in the stone that remain today where it's fixed into. There's a wooden palisade. The artistic interpretation there portrays the feudal hierarchy, and the different coloured stone reveals the changes made. The large window suggests more of a domestic purpose in the 14th century, and of course the walls of the South Barbican remain, allowing us to get an impression and an understanding of this very important defensive building. So what does the West Tower reveal about Helmsley Castle? Well, it was built by Robert de Roos II around the year 1200, the same as the East Tower. It was a private great chamber for the de Roos. It's a found example of what we call a solar tower. It was built within the ditch of Espec's original ditch that he had in the castle, which divided his two baileys, and the chamber block was built next to it in the year 1200. Now, the West Tower was heightened in the 14th century and a latrine inserted into each floor. The basement has a window and it may have been used either for storage or an accounting officer may have worked there. The West Tower, along with the chamber block, was remodelled as a Tudor mansion in the 16th century. Oak remains from the 16th century renovations, which you can see in the small picture there. So you can see a little bit of the wood that was used for the floor beams. In the 1570s, a loggia or covered walkway ran along the length of the range. The stone base of the timber columns are all in position. Now, if we look at this, we can see here, a study of the physical site evidence today reveals that new mullioned windows were put in to let more light in during the Tudor renovations by the Manners family. The old windows were bricked up and fireplaces were installed instead. This reveals the lives of luxury for the Manners family. If you look at the other side of this wall, which you can see on the right hand side picture, you can see where those windows were bricked up and that remodeling that's taken place. In terms of looking at the actual Tudor mansion from the other side, okay, we can see obviously the West Tower A, the original doorway in B, C, the doorway from the first floor onto the loggia balcony, D, the base of the medieval chimney, E, the footings of the step that led onto the loggia balcony, F, the chamber block itself, G, the footings of the Elizabethan long gallery, sometimes known as the corridor, and H is the latrine tower. And we can see there a picture of the foundations of the Elizabethan's long gallery there, which is known as the corridor. And these small stones are the foundations of the loggia, another popular Elizabethan mansion feature. And just a nice little link to the Elizabethans, the loggia at Hardwick Hall, that just gives you an impression of what a loggia actually looks like. More evidence of the Tudor mansion. We've got the interior of the Tudor mansion had decorative plasterwork on the ceilings, wood panelling and grand fireplaces. There is a heraldic frieze too, typical of Elizabethan style and fashion. And then just note the oriel windows sticking out on the first floor of the Tudor mansion. They were added by Edward Manners in Tudor times. This was to afford even better views of the hunting lands that these grand staterooms looked out upon. We can use the site evidence to construct artistic interpretations inside. We still have that fireplace. We can see the evidence of the ornamental plasterwork that has survived in a few places. We can still see some of the furniture, such as the chest that is still in the castle today. And we've got the site evidence for the wood panelling as well. So looking at some other features of the Tudor mansion, we've got the ornamental plasterwork decorating the ceilings, and there's the wood panelling, which is very fashionable in Elizabethan manor houses, and a frieze just above it, as well as some nice views of the ornamental plasterwork as well. And then we can look at the fireplace. The site evidence of this intricate wood carving above the ornate fireplace reveals the wealth of the Manners family, their lives of luxury. They wish to show off their wealth. And there's a lovely little feature here that we can see. It says Anno Domini 1582. That reveals to us when the works were completed. Okay, let's look at the Great Hall now. We'll start off with the artistic interpretation. So if you were to construct this artistic interpretation, we can still see the gap within the footings where the doorway would have been. This is the special door that the De Roos family went in through. The proximity of the pantry, buttery, and the kitchen points to the domestic role of this part of the castle. We also know servants would have slept in the Great Hall, so that shows the diversity of this part of the castle. The end where the De Roos family were was known as the high end, and we can still see the footings of the dais, the raised platform that they sat on. The width of the room and the site evidence of the buttresses against one wall suggest the building was aisled with columns supporting a pitched roof. There's no evidence of a fireplace in the Great Hall, which allows us to conclude there would have been an open hearth with an opening in the roof for smoke to escape, and the Great Hall would have had an administrative function as a manor court. So we can use site evidence to construct the Great Hall and reconstruct the Great Hall through an artistic interpretation. And remember, if you get an exam question which asks you to talk about artistic interpretations, always include the people that would have been in them. The Great Hall reflects the diversity of the castle and reveals a lot about people's lives. So in terms of site evidence of the Great Hall, we've got the visual nature of the high end and the low end. The Great Hall was located conveniently close to the service area, but also next to the West Tower where the De Roos family lived. So it very much reinforces that diversity. There's the gap in the footings, which indicates where the special doorway was that the De Roos family used to access the Great Hall. And here we can see the footings of the dais, the raised platform. So the far end was the part of the Great Hall where the De Roos sat, known as the high end. The end nearest the screens passage and where the buttery and service area was is known as the low end. Site evidence allows us to reconstruct this. We're now going to talk about some more site evidence in terms of the South Barbican. So the South Barbican was remodelled in the 14th century to provide more accommodation. The South Barbican was originally open-backed but was enclosed during the 14th century. Two chambers were built against the inner face of the west curtain wall. The larger of the two had a fireplace and latrine. A latrine turret was added on the east side of the gatehouse, and site evidence of a fireplace and a drain in the west tower suggests there could have been a small kitchen as well. The accommodation may well have been built for the constable of the castle. Source records showed the constable was paid 3p per day, which was not huge. The rooms above the gateway were remodelled in the 14th century with a large window. The 14th century changes were built out of yellowish brown sandstone, whereas the 13th century original was built out of the more greyish limestone. And we've got there some site evidence of the fireplace as well. We've also got a carving of an imp on the South Barbican, which is quite interesting. The constable was the person who was in charge of security, so you can use the South Barbican to write about the constable in the 14th century. The modern day term police constable comes from this. He was in command of any military personnel as well as permanent castle staff such as the porter, jailer and watchman. And we know as well that King Edward III ordered William de Roos and his constable William Starr to keep safe a prisoner called Joan Fletcher and her guard Thomas Overton at Helmsley Castle in 1338, and then in 1371 Richard de Flamborough, a wealthy man of Helmsley, was the constable. The two men were probably paid around about 3p a day and given a robe each year worth 20 shillings. In terms of site evidence of the chapel, this is part of a moulded jamb of the chapel which survived from the southeast corner of the chapel. A chaplain would have been based at the chapel. In fact, we've got some source evidence that the canons from Kirkham complained to the Archbishop of York when the chapel was consecrated, as their income from the local parish church would suffer. So we've got a rectangular chapel that was built and consecrated in 1246. It's built facing east, which is why it joins the east tower at an angle, and its central nature shows the importance of religion within the castle in the 13th century. Mosaic floor tiles, similar to those at Revo, have been found in the Inner Bailey, and it reveals the chapel was expensively decorated. The windows would have had stained glass, and the walls would have been lime-washed with biblical paintings. The site evidence reveals the importance of religion to the lives of the De Roos family. Now, the castle's museum contains some fragments of glass that reveal the decorative features of the medieval chapel. The fact that it was richly decorated reveals the importance of religion and Christianity to the De Roos family. So there you have it. That's the walkthrough of the big five in terms of physical site evidence. If you know these five different places really, really well, you will be well prepared to answer many of the questions about Helmsley Castle, that's for sure. We're now going to look at some other interesting parts of site evidence, just to add a little bit more depth to some questions to help you with site evidence. Okay, so this is quite a quirky part of Helmsley Castle. It's called the Door to Nowhere. It can be accessed via spiral stairs going down from the chamber block, now the ground floor of the museum. And it's likely there was a wooden bridge there that is no longer there now. So it's quite interesting for showing you sort of the changing purpose and changing use, but the fact that there might have been a bridge there. In terms of the site evidence of the south gate, we can sort of see some of the defensive features here, like the inner drawbridge abutment, for example, the location of where a drawbridge would have been. Obviously, we've got the modern bridge nowadays, and little posterns, little gateways down into the ditch to inspect the ditches. So that's some nice evidence of the south gate. The south gate was one of the main entrances into the castle. The porter would have been there checking who people were coming through into the castle. The well provides good site evidence. Having a source of water accessible in the castle was vital if the castle were to survive a siege. Water was used for drinking, cooking, brewing, and also by the laundress, who would have kept the clothes of the de Roos family clean. The well was crucial during the siege of Helmsley Castle in 1644. We've got William's windows here. You might be wondering why some of the windows are bricked up in the Tudor mansion. In 1696, King William III brought in a new tax called the window tax. It's likely that Charles Duncombe did not want to pay higher taxes. This is why some of the windows in the Tudor mansion have been bricked up, and it's known as William's window. Here we've got some site evidence of the brew house and the bake house in the 15th century. It reflects the increase in population of the castle and the increase in domestic role in the 15th century. We've got some remains of the old bread ovens that we can see here. So some archaeological evidence from the site. So archaeologists came to the site in the 20th century and made some discoveries. We've got a fragment from Helmsley Castle of a 13th century green pot decorated with a face. A number of keys were found at the castle, including this example from the 14th century. And locally made ware, 16th century pot used for cooking, tells us about domestic kind of role of the castle. Here we've got some ornate stone carvings that have been found in archaeological excavations of the castle site. They date from the 12th and 13th centuries, and it tells that stone was partly used as a building material in the early castle. So there's a monk's head here, probably came from an early chapel. This decorative stonework reveals the wealth of the de Roos family. We've got detail from a finely carved wood partition between the two upper floor rooms of the chamber block. We've got objects associated with dining, such as small daggers to use at the table. The fragment from a glazed cistern used for holding liquids like ale has been found on the site. And again, hand-button ware cistern from the 14th or 15th century will be used to hold things like water or ale. There would have been like a little tap on it as well. And this would have been used in things like great feasts, for example. We've got a 9 men's Morris game, giving the insight into the medieval pastimes. We've got a chamber pot from Helmsley Castle from the 16th and 17th century. Not everyone used the latrines. We've got the green glazing roofing tiles and fragments of glass, which tells about the chapel. We've got cannon shot found at Helmsley Castle. They tell us about the Civil War siege. What else have we got? We have got 2 half bottoms recovered from Helmsley Castle. The lower one's been sectioned to analyse its composition. We've got fragments of 17th century chargers, which are large serving dishes. These good quality products suggest a high standard of living. We've got evidence of the plaster work. We've got medieval arrowheads that have been found at the site and in the grounds at Duncan Park, telling us about hunting that went on at the site. We've got light green glazed pots decorated with the brown clay with a high iron content. We've got many of the glazed pots found are coloured green, which is created by adding copper or reducing oxygen in the kiln. The amount of pottery reflects the domestic use of the castle and just how many people were living there. So these are all fragments of pottery and chargers, serving plates that have been found at the castle. Okay, so last few things to go through. Today, the castle reveals much about the defensive features that show the castle's original purpose and would have served to project the power of the Lords of Helmsley. We've got the double ditch earthworks, we've got round towers, we have got the Barbican, south and north Barbican, we've got portcullis, evidence for a portcullis with these grooves in the wall. We've got arrow loops, we've got the crenellations on the east tower. Again, defensive purposes. We've got curtain walls about 20 feet high. We've got a large storage space, which would have been good for sieges. That's underneath the west tower. And we've got Doors that lock, for example, again showing the security required in the castle. Today, as well, the castle reveals much about the lives of comfort and lives of luxury. So we've got fireplaces, we've got large windows, that's one in the South Barbican. We've got the ornate chapel with the stained glass fragments that are found. We've got the oriel windows from the Tudor mansion, the special doorway to enter the Great Hall from the West Tower for the de Roos family. We've got decorative stonework. We've got Hambleton ware assisting for drinks for the Great Feast, for example. We've got the Nine Men's Morris game. We've got charger serving dishes, which can be used as site evidence for, serving great feasts of food within the Great Hall in medieval times. So there you have some of the key places. So make sure you learn about the Big Five: East Tower, Chapel, South Barbican, Great Hall, West Tower and Tudor Mansion. Okay, so thanks very much for listening to that video about what site evidence reveals about the history of Helmsley Castle. Thanks for going through that, and the best of luck in your exams. Bye bye.